Today's lecture is about prose written in the era of Queen Elizabeth I. So it would be called Elizabethan prose. This lecture is presented by Shafakus Sahar. Elizabethan prose, or the writing that was not poetry, was being written in that era, and there were many forms of it. There were long romances, there were essays, there were sermons that were religious writings, and they were supposed to be for the purpose of doing on the rostrum somewhere in a church. All these things are being written. All of us know that the dramatists of that time were mainly Marlowe and Shakespeare, and we also know that the poetry of Herbert Spencer and Shakespeare was in vogue in the times of Queen Elizabeth. Now, who were the prose writers and what they were writing is the topic of today's lecture. Elizabethan prose actually started with the translations because whenever a nation is rising, and it was the time of Renaissance, time of enlightenment, at that time that nation is looking out of the boundaries of itself. It is coming out of its shell and seeing what is happening all around. And the first thing is translation of the foreign works. When you start reading something written by the foreigners, then you leave your national shell and you start learning. So Elizabethan prose started with the translations. Many books were translated into English. Mostly those were being translated from Latin. One of the translators, Sir Thomas North, is famous because he translated Lives of the Noble, Grecians and Romans, a book that was written by Plutarch. Plutarch was one of the writers who is one of the first or the best historians of the world, and he has written on European history very accurately. So, translation of Plutarch's work was the first thing that came into translation, and Elizabethan prose started. He was one of the best translators, and his sentence structure was very good. Bible was translated in that era into many languages and English as well. Before that, Bible was in Latin, and every person with limited knowledge of Latin could not understand it. So William Tyndale translated it into English, and he translated it from Greek and Hebrew. He was later, sadly, burned to death because of his beliefs. This version of the Bible was written in a strong, beautiful language. It was very impressive, and many English writers were influenced by the beauty of its diction and its style. So, in this way, this translation of Bible has put a great impact on the general writing of Elizabethan prose. Some type of romances, the long stories in prose were being written at that time. We do not call them novels because they were not properly novels, but still they were in prose, and those were stories. John Lyly was writing, and he wrote a novel named Euphues. His style is still called euphuism because he used very made up sentences, and he used the sentences that were short but they had very strong message and strong meanings, and there were very many linguistic tricks and alliterations used there. So his novel was rather popular, and as the book printing had started, these type of books were popular among the ladies. This artificial style was so popular that even Shakespeare is known to have influenced by it. Second novelist, sort of novelist, again the prose writer, was Thomas Nash, and he wrote a picaresque novel. Picaresque novel is a novel who is about a bad person, a bad but lovable person who is the hero of that novel. In that novel, we see middle or lower middle class. That was usually not the fashion in those days. And that novel was also interesting and liked by the people. But both of these types of the writings remained popular for some time. After some time, those writings were not read by the people and they simply disappeared. Thomas Nash, what he was writing? He was writing some dramas. Isle of the Dog, Summer's Last Will are two famous dramas. He was the real successor of Green, and he was writing in a realistic and satiristic way in dramas. But still, his work that we are talking about, the prose work, was not very good, although it was something new in that time. And Lyly was the English writer, dramatist, playwright, and he is best known for Euphues. We have already discussed that. His literary style was famous at that time. Now it is considered very artificial. One of the very prominent writers of that time is Sir Philip Sidney. Sir Philip Sidney was a critic and a dramatist at the same time, and he was a true Elizabethan gentleman. That means the Renaissance man who should have all the qualities. One person should be a courtier, a statesman, a poet, a soldier, a lover. He should play music, he should paint as well. All these things were found in Sydney, so he was a jack of all trades. Sidney's works did not publish when he was alive. One book, The Old Arcadia, was written by him. The second book is called, in the same vein, The New Arcadia. The most famous work is Defense of Poesy, that is a work of criticism. And he has criticized on the poetry and drama, and he has written a book that is still very relevant to the criticism and theory. Francis Bacon, the star of that era, first his essays started appearing in 1597, and after that they were printed in 1612 and 1625 after editions. His essays are short, sharp, and effective. He has written many essays. The essays are not very lengthy. Their style of writing is very captivating, and he has discussed numerous general topics. Like his essays have titles of love, of marriage, of truth, of death, and all these topics are actually most effective for every type of people. So, all people like to read those essays that were beautifully written. Francis Bacon became very famous, and he is called the father of English prose. He wrote in English and Latin, and his style is again aphoristic. That means there are short sentences that state something very powerfully. His essays are full of remarkable thoughts. His ideas were great, and he described them so in such a few words that he was the only master of his craft. So his books are The Essays, The Advancement of Learning, History of Henry VII, and New Atlantis. There was a group of people very famous in Elizabethan era. Most of them wrote some prose too. Those people were called university wits, and the reason was that most of them were studying in Cambridge and Oxford universities. Some of these names are John Lyly, Thomas Kidd, George Peele, Robert Greene, Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Nash, and Thomas Lodge. Thanks for watching. Hope this lecture is helpful.